What's the worst thing that's happened at your family gathering? Introduced to a distant cousin for the first time who was a 10. She was beautiful, and I was told that she was deaf. I never met a deaf person before. We were both 15 years old. I shook her hand and said to my brother who was standing next to me, "She's a babe." She started to laugh. "I read lips," she said. I gotta say, calling anyone at a family gathering a babe is kinda weird too, man. Starting off strong. Story 2. Our worst family story happened at my aunt's wedding. My aunt, a white lady, was marrying a Korean-American man, whose parents really wanted him to marry a Korean woman. During their entire engagement, his parents would randomly invite Korean women over for dinner to try and sway him. Eventually, they seemed to get over the fact that he was definitely going to be marrying a white girl. On the wedding day, his parents seemed politely resigned to the situation. His father actually even danced with my aunt at the reception, so we were all relieved. After dancing, his father approached the mic, and we were all expecting him to give a toast about how my aunt was so great that he overcame his prejudices or something. Instead, he said in his thick Korean accent, "This is abomination, like German Shepherd mating with poodle." My aunt ran out of the room crying, and my grandfather casually walked up and punched him in the face in front of 200 wedding guests. People cheered. Gotta say, sorry if y'all were expecting some really thick Asian accent. I'm not about that. I don't know how to do one properly even. That being said, the line, "This is an abomination like a German Shepherd mating with a poodle," goes kinda hard. Except for the fact that I guess it's not even that weird in terms of dog breeding. Story 3. This didn't happen to me, but I watched it happen and it was awful. My cousin was pregnant from a guy who she had only been dating for a few months, but he was a good guy. On Christmas Eve, she invited him to our family gathering, and when we were exchanging presents, he grabbed a small box from the tree and was about 2 seconds from getting down on one knee, when that uncle jokingly says, "God, hope you're not proposing." Everyone laughs, and this poor guy is in a half-bent knee/half-standing pose and just looks up at that uncle and slowly powers through it and slowly gets down on one knee and proceeds to ask her if she'll marry him. She said yes, and they're engaged, but it was one of the worst 45 seconds of my life. Props to that guy for still following through. That is a gut punch in the middle of a proposal. What an absolute jerk. The uncle, I mean. Story 4. My grandmother tried to shoot herself in the front yard because my mother wouldn't let me and my siblings, 6, 4, and 2, ride sitting on the back hood of my uncle's classic convertible during their neighborhood 4th of July parade. She was angry that no one would be able to see our outfits if we were seated inside of the car, and while trying to shoot herself, accidentally grazed my grandpa in the process. Good times. A bit of a flair for the dramatic, this woman, huh? Story 5. We had a huge family dinner at a very fancy restaurant. My great aunt decides to move a very fancy pot of flowers with some peacock feathers stuck in it out of the way. In this case, out of the way meant right above the candles. Well, it turns out peacock feathers burn incredibly fast and produce a lot of smoke. The whole restaurant had to be evacuated. To be honest, it wasn't really that bad. The dinner had been incredibly boring. 14-year-old me certainly thought the fire made things more interesting. Story 6. Great-grandma's funeral in Arkansas. I have some distant third cousin named Stormy. Again, this is Arkansas. And we are all gathered around the grave. As the preacher starts to lead us in prayer, you hear this awful noise. Everyone turns to look, and there is Stormy, swinging an armadillo around his head by the tail. One of my other cousins got him to put the armadillo down so we could finish the service, but I don't recall ever having seen him at another family function since. Story 7. My brother throwing a temper tantrum at age 30. It's been pretty common for him to blow up about little stuff in his life. It was his youngest daughter's 2nd birthday, and he was in a crappy mood all day, even though our mom and his wife had taken care of everything. It came to a head when it was about time to do the cake. It was a kind of tall cake with a carousel on top. The dog bumped into the table and the cake shifted a little, almost knocking the carousel over. He stood up and said something like, "God damn it, your friggin' dog is ruining everything." My mom said, "Calm down, the cake is fine." He got in her face and said, "Don't tell me what to do." At that point, my brother and stepdad got up and kind of surrounded him, ready to kick his butt. He, after a few seconds, finally stormed out of the house and left. I feel the need to reiterate at this point that he was 30 years old and it was his daughter's 2nd birthday. The poor mother of that daughter. Like, if it was a one-time thing, I'd be like, sure, people can have, like, really bad days for whatever reason, right? But OP says this is a recurring theme, and that's just worrying. I don't think that family is going to do very well. I'm hoping the best for the child at the very least. Story 8. Thanksgiving, about 1985. Family gathering at my parents' home. Mom, dad, brother, sister, grandmas, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. We're all watching football. Cousin picks up the remote to mess with the volume, but turns on the VCR by accident. Full-blown adult film fills the screen. Dad leaps, grabs the remote, and fumbles frantically to try to turn it off. Bible thumper brother and sister-in-law snatch up their kids and leave. Cousin says, "Boy, that sudden death can really get intense." Story 9. Aunts, uncles, and dad start arguing over my grandfather's possessions after his passing in his house after his funeral. Lots of yelling, pushing, get the frick out that day. Eventually pulled my dad out of the house in an effort to save the family, but they never recovered. My uncle passed away without ever speaking with my dad again, and the others speak a bit to each other, but we haven't had any family events. It's been 3 years. Story 10. This happened like a week ago at a little get-together of my family at my house. My brother-in-law and his wife got into a huge argument about their new baby's medical care. The little one had a terrible case of psoriasis, and he blamed his wife for not staying on top of it, causing it to bleed. During this shouting match, brother-in-law declared that if he was going to be raising some other man's baby, he was going to be calling the fricking shots from then on. They have been married for 10 years and have 2 other girls. We were all so mortified, we left my house. 10 other people got into cars and went to the park. Okay, I can just imagine the scene, right? He's standing there having this argument and he's like, I know exactly what to say that'll set the entire gathering off and get them on my side. He dropped it and I don't think it had quite the effect he was intending, but I bet a lot of people were like, that's a good point. Before leaving, that is. Story 11. Christmas at my aunt's house with my whole extended family on my dad's side, and their pets. In particular, these 2 dogs, one of which was very fond of the other, and this dog decided he wanted to have his way with the smaller, uninterested dog. Long story short, the large dog nut all over the kitchen floor, leaving a huge mess that we had to clean up before eating our dinner. At no point in this short story did I know where it was going to go at all. What a wild ride. Story 12. Someone got stabbed at my wedding reception, so that was fun. It was my brother and sister's dad and his girlfriend who had gotten into some drunken knife-wielding fight in the parking lot. Edit. Since there are so many questions on this, my brother and sister are technically my half-brother and sister. We share a mother, they share a mother and a father. And here's a clearer version of what happened. Basically, my half-brother and half-sister have a dad. Let's call him Loserface, who came to my wedding reception with his trashy, half-his-age girlfriend. Loserface and girlfriend proceeded to get plastered and end up in the parking lot in a drunken fight. I wasn't present for this, and we all just heard pieces of it from multiple people. The story is that girlfriend pulled a knife and tried to stab Loserface in her drunken anger. There was more fighting. Girlfriend sliced her own hand open. This is not disputed by any party. She then proceeds to run around the hall bleeding all over the place. So, okay, no one actually got stabbed. It was a pretty traumatic thing, though, that was upsetting for a while, but now, 2 years later, it's just something we all laugh about. And I haven't seen or spoken to Loserface or girlfriend, but they're still together, and have since had a baby that they don't have custody of, which should really paint a picture of the kind of people I am semi-related to. Story 13. My dad got married again when I was 22. I used this excuse to start drinking at 9 a.m. Needless to say, at around 1 or 2 in the morning, I am so screwed up and ready for bed. I don't remember making it back to my dad's house. I lived in the basement apartment. Apparently, after getting home, I proceeded to strip off all of my clothes and get into my dad and his new wife's bed. Everyone else is still partying until late, and finally the happy couple decide they've had enough and want to retire to their bed. Stepmom comes in and finds me passed out, so she figures she'll wake me up by stripping the blankets off me. Boy, was she surprised as naked me gets up and belligerently yells at her for waking me up. I then argue that it's my bed and I go get something to drink in the kitchen. Another 20 of my relatives get the pleasure of taking in my naked butt. With some coaxing, they manage to get me into some clothes and into my own bed. I wake up 6 hours later with no recollection of the night's events. I am surprised no one stopped you from getting far enough so that 20 people saw you naked. Like, your stepmother at no point was like, okay, let's get some clothes on you, or anything. She's just like, he can deal with it. Story 14. I luckily missed this Christmas because me and my mom and dad were in Disney. My great-grandma had a dog. Can't recall what it was, but it was super small since before I was born. Well, one Christmas, everyone is eating in the kitchen with a clear view of the dog in the backyard. In the middle of Christmas dinner, a big Doberman came into the backyard and ripped the little dog's throat out. Kind of a ruined Christmas. Story 15. 5 years or so ago, I went to my aunt and uncle's Christmas party. My one cousin spilled some alcoholic eggnog, and the family dog drank a lot of it before they realized to clean it up. The eggnog was powerful. Anyway, the dog starts going through every stage of alcohol poisoning, and we just had to watch and hope for the best, because no vets were on call around us due to Christmas. Anyway, me and a few cousins were in the garage, and the dog is laying down with labored breathing. We're comforting our one cousin who is younger and who is crying, and we've got her more calmed down just petting the dog. My grandma walks in, and she's never been, sensitive, I guess. She takes one look at the dog and says, that dog's gonna die, and walks out. And my cousin starts wailing again, and all us older cousins were angry. Anyway, the dog lived and is still alive today. It was just crappy that it all happened, and I cannot imagine what it would have been like to witness the family dog being ripped apart in front of everyone like the last story. Story 16. There was a small fight that erupted that basically severed all deep emotional ties that my brother and I had for my grandmother. We have a cousin once removed who was the last baby in the family. Ever since he was born, our grandmother has clearly treated him as the favorite. She would buy him thousands of dollars worth of presents at Christmas time. We would get $20. Were we jealous? A little. But I think we were just sort of thinking how ridiculous it was. Because when we were young, we never had that much money spent on us. Anyway, fast forward 9 or so years, and the second cousin is obviously spoiled and usually bratty. I think it might have been Thanksgiving. But we were all at my aunt's house, and my brother and I were in the living room watching football. Everyone else was in the kitchen/dining room. My second cousin enters and just starts saying stuff to get a rise out of us. He started talking about sports and how he was capable of liking 2 football teams. My brother and I tried to explain fanhood to him, and he went into the kitchen and dining room and told everyone in there that my brother had called him stupid. Well, it hit the fan. There's yelling from our cousin once removed's mom, who said, "You called a 9-year-old stupid?" And we said, "No." And my brother said, "We're saying that he's lying." And she said, "Oh, so you're calling him a liar?" And she stormed off with him and left. My grandmother yells at us that we are disgusting and immature for picking on him. So we basically said everything that had been on our chests for the past few years about how it was ridiculous how much he was spoiled, and how she was trying to buy his love. Don't talk much to my grandmother anymore. My brother and I have not received any cards from her since the incident. When I came home last summer, first time I'd been back in 3 years, she just sort of looked at me. Wasn't happy or excited at all. I got $5 from her on my birthday, which I found both hilarious and insulting. Yeah, we play for keeps. So when the cousin says, "You called him stupid," and then followed that up with, "Oh, so you're calling him a liar?" There are only 2 options here. So you gotta take your pick of the lesser evil. Would you prefer that they called him stupid or that he's lying? Because this is just a full-on dichotomy. There's only these 2 options that could be true. You can't be mad about both. Story 17. My wife is pregnant and we were a few months in. We had gone to the doctor to find out the sex and we were throwing a family party to deliver the news. Her family is very well off and very large. I'm talking 50 people within a 5-block radius to her grandparents' house. My side of the family is super small. Just my mom, stepfather, and aunt come to the party. So I supplemented my side with some of our mutual couple friends. About an hour into the party, we had everyone go outside for the reveal. We prepared these poppers filled with confetti, either blue for male or pink for female, for the announcement. I thought it would be hilarious to make one filled with the opposite color, but my wife said no. Anyway, everyone gets a popper, lines up on either side of the driveway, 3, 2, 1, pop. Pink glitter and confetti fly into the air. Everyone is hooting and hollering in celebration. We start receiving congratulatory remarks from my friends and her family. I made the announcement that we had come up with a name. Right after I said the name, the mother comes up to me and says, "Are you sure it's not a boy?" Yep, very sure. The doctor confirmed it last weekend. A tear starts to roll down her cheek. "And y'all are firm on the name?" "We really like the name we picked out." "What about my middle name, Jean?" "I'll get with my wife, but I think we're pretty set on the name we picked out." She left shortly after that exchange without saying goodbye. Apparently, right after the pop, she turned to my friend who had just gotten her PhD and asked how reliable those sonograms are at determining the sex of the child. She gave us the cold shoulder for the next 3 months. And has a collection of boy names ready just in case 3 doctors and a handful of nurses were all wrong about us having a baby girl. OP, if this is the worst thing that's happened at a family gathering for you, I envy you. Story 18. We gathered at my grandma's house, where my mom and all her sisters had been raised. My oldest aunt had done a bunch of dodgy stuff to glom all the estate, and my sisters had come in force with their husbands and kids to try and talk sense into her. It did not work. They should have lawyered up, but this was the 60s. All of us cousins had been kicked outside while the grown-ups argued. I was just a little kid and I went in to get a glass of water. She had put locks on the cupboard. Mean aunt came in and slapped me across the face so hard I was staggered. I did not get water. One of my older cousins found me crying and took me to town, riding on his shoulder part of the way to buy me a soda at the drugstore and a few toys. Many years later, my mom told me mean aunt most likely poisoned grandma, and it seems true. Story 19. About 12 years ago, we were all at my uncle's house. Me, my siblings, parents, grandparents, and obviously my aunt and uncle. Grandpa was drinking some coffee with dessert when it went down the wrong pipe and he choked up a bit. My mom, being one of the biggest overreactors I have ever known, assumes he's having another heart attack. He has a history of heart trouble, and she flips out. When my aunt tried to intervene and say that he wasn't having a heart attack and only coughing because of the coffee, they got into a screaming and shoving fight. Eventually, my uncle just goes, "Get the frick out of my house! Get the frick out now!" 10 minutes later, we're all in the car and out of there. Up until last year, they cut off all contact with my aunt and uncle, and fairly recently they've talked to them, added them on Facebook, invited them to events, etc. What a weird thing to get in a screaming match about. The craziest thing is, I don't even know who's in the wrong. I feel like it has to be both of them, right? Because I get it, stressful situations are stressful, and thus you can have overreactions to things like they both did, I assume. But at the same time, there was no harm. Like, I don't understand. I wonder how it started, because I just can't fathom what the ignition was for all this. Story 20. A friend of mine who wasn't ever good with the ladies one day showed up with this really awesome chick. They hit it off right away and it was like a match made in heaven. Then they went to go to his mom and stepdad's house to have dinner, where he was going to introduce his girlfriend to them. His mother was horrified when she walked in. Why? Because this girl was his sister and they'd been separated at birth. The mother kept the son and the father kept the little girl. Screwed up thing is they stayed together for about 2 years after this, continuing to bang and acting like nothing was wrong. Oh, at first I was like, unfortunately, yeah, that really sucks. Then OP hit him with that they stayed together, they were banging for 2 years? I don't know about that one. Story 21. Thanksgiving back in 1998. I was 8 years old, and my wealthy grandparents decided to take the whole family to Maui for the week. This included our 5-person family and around 15 extended family members. All was great until Thanksgiving dinner. My older cousins started bickering, which turned into a pretty big altercation and some food throwing. 8-year-old me is loving it until the uncles get involved. My 18-year-old male cousin, who is a total jerk, starts freaking out at my 15-year-old female cousin, calling her a harlot for reasons unbeknownst to me. At this point, female cousin's dad comes flying over and punches his nephew so hard that he is literally thrown a few feet and nearly knocked out. Now the other uncle has to defend his son, which results in a few punches between the two until my family can separate them. There will never be a better Thanksgiving dinner, and my grandparents will never take us anywhere again. Story 22. With an ex at a family gathering, maybe Thanksgiving. Everyone decided to take that year's family picture around the big tractor my ex's dad owned. This thing had all sorts of attachments, including a pretty large backhoe bucket. Dad turns it on, raises the bucket a bit for the elder members of the family to sit on, and then turns it off. The little kids pile up in the cab of the tractor. One of the ex's uncles had adopted this little girl who was weird. She decided to start fiddling with the controls of the tractor. Now, the tractor is turned off, but apparently the controls could still release the hydraulics. So down goes the bucket with Grandma and Grandpa sitting on it. Everyone starts screaming. Grandma is quick enough to get away, but not Grandpa. Kid pulls the controls the other way thinking the bucket will lift, but it keeps going down and pins Grandpa's legs under it. Everyone is screaming but kind of frozen, until I nudge the ex-boyfriend and he turns the tractor on and raises the bucket. Grandpa is bruised but okay, though I doubt his legs were in the same condition after that. This sounds absolutely horrifying. I don't understand how the grandpa did not, lose legs here. Everything I hear about older people is they are fragile. It sounds like it would have decimated me. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty bad. I'm sure all of you listening have your own stories, so if you'd like to, throw them in the comments. I'll give them a read. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.